Ingmar Bergman is one of the greatest directors in the history of the cinema. Part of what makes him that is his actors are phenomenal. I mean, really some of the greatest acting in film ever. Now, they don't come strictly from American method technique, but they share a lot of the underpinnings of that, particularly with sense memory. You know, if you read Ingmar Bergman's autobiography, I think there's a couple of those. The Magic Lantern, I forget the name of the other one. They're very sensorial. He talks about when he was a little boy and the smells and the tastes and the sounds and the touch of everything in the house he grew up in, the gardens. He speaks very sensorially. He speaks in the language of sense memory. And in his films, they are highly sensory, very much finding in the acting all of those things, all those sense impressions, senses, taste, smell, sound, sight, hearing. Much like Marcel Proust's great novel, À la recherche de temps perdu, A Remembrance of Things Past, was kind of the first Bible of sense memory. Why is this important to acting? Because it makes you really alive and experiencing, and it's really how human beings function, is constantly finding things with their senses, remembering things with their senses, instead of being intellectual, theoretical, or concerned so much with objectives or choices, but rather with experiencing in the moment through the senses and through what Stanislavski called objects of attention, meaning. It doesn't have to be an object, it's focus of attention might be better. What we're focused on at any given moment. What I smell, what I hear, what I think, what I feel in my left arm. Maybe you're listening to me, hopefully, and what you're hearing from me. All of these things, we have tens of thousands of them every day. This is very powerful, actually. It seems obvious, but you can actually use objects of attention to get deeper into a scene, deeper into being the character, instead of just trying to execute actions that you think the character might do. But actually to become so involved in it, you're not monitoring that. It's just happening moment to moment. Of course, it takes a lot of work to build up a palette of colors that you can draw on that will come up in the moment. And that's where the real work of the actor is prior to performance or filmmaking. And Bergman has trained or communicated, collaborated with his actors quite a lot in this regard. And it comes through in a film like Cries and Whispers very, very strongly. Because it is a film about memory, and particularly about sense memory. It is highly emotional. It's one thing about Bergman that is famous about him, is that his actors go to very deep, strange, and unexpected emotional places. And of course, actors always want to do that. They want to show off their emotional range, particularly younger actors. And so they find out, or they train to the point in whatever technique they're using, where they can become more or less instantly emotional in some way or another. They can laugh hysterically, they can cry, they can hysterically cry, they can get angry, all of these things. But that's great, but that's not it. That's good to have those tools, that's all. But you don't really know, like in life, you don't really know what emotion is going to come up at what moment. It could be 2-3 emotions blended in together. It could be something that surprises you, that you thought you would feel one way and you feel another way. We experience this in our own lives quite a bit. For instance, for me, this is personal. usually when someone I've been close to in life dies, I don't instantly start crying or mourning. I'm usually in a kind of strange state of shock. And after about the third time this happened to me, I realized it's about something like 45 minutes. And commonly I have to get outside. I have to walk. I just walk and walk and walk and walk. Almost in a state of catatonia. I don't know when I'm just walking. And after about 45 minutes, I break down and start sobbing. Or maybe some slightly different emotional reaction, but something strong. And it took me that long to process it. I couldn't, my emotional equipment couldn't handle it for 45 minutes, and then something relaxes and it hits me. And again, this doesn't happen exactly the same way every time. I can't anticipate it. I'm not thinking about that. I'm just going through a kind of process pretty much subconsciously. So, and other people, everybody has their own way in that kind of situation or in many, many others of processing it. Sometimes your reaction is instantaneous. Sometimes it takes a while. Sometimes there are waves of the reaction that blend with other things. It's unpredictable. It's like a good surfer knows that he knows a lot about waves, or she, about waves and surfing and so forth, but each wave is different. You have to take the wave moment by moment by moment to feel it, to actually feel it with your body and smell the breeze and feel it on your skin, and all the elements of your senses are involved in this, in riding a wave well, or skiing a mountain after a snowfall where it's a bit different than it was yesterday. All of these activities require a moment-to-moment sort of concentration and at the same time a relaxation so that anything can come up and be expressed. Your character is the filter of your expression. Maybe you do not express so much that you feel. Like Anthony Hopkins in the film The Remains of the Day. That was a huge thing in the performance. And that's part of character building, is to discover how much your character holds back, how much they cannot help but react emotionally, and not to actually know, but to experience that and to find it, to discover it over the rehearsal period, and even when you're actually performing. And you see the expertise of the actors in Bergman's films, that they really, really understand this, because their emotions are pretty unpredictable. They're strong often, but they're unpredictable. They do quite strange things in a way, but they feel true the moment they do them. And how they got there feels true too, even though they're quite difficult. Bergman's extremely demanding on his actors. He puts puzzles in front of them that they have to solve. The puzzle of the entirety of the soul of a person, that they could be wicked and cruel at the same time vulnerable, as the character of Karin, played by Ingrid Thulin in Cries and Whispers, is. Or they can be quite superficial, seemingly, as Liv Ullmann's character of Maria is, and at the same time, at times you feel a depth and you feel an empathy from her, but it doesn't last. It's not the normal part of her character, though she wants it very desperately. And so she allows herself to do that occasionally. There's more than one side to these people. The sister that's dying, Agnes, played by Harriet Andersson, is the one who is sick with cancer, and she's dying, and she's in enormous pain a lot of the time. And now I've seen this actress play whores, evil women, crazy women, all of these things, very, very negative, very powerfully negative. In this film, you see her as a very pure soul. Now very few of us are very pure souls. Maybe a few children here and there. And yet, most of the time when you see somebody play a pure soul, like they cast some beautiful model in Joan of Arc, and she's terrible. It's not really her fault. Joan of Arc was one of the most amazing people, if her story is true, that ever lived. It's an extraordinarily difficult role. You don't just give it to some model because she looks good when she looks pure, unless she's some kind of great actress as well. It's an extraordinarily difficult role. You need a great, great actress to play it. Purity is very rare. Harriet Andersson, who plays such opposite roles often, becomes a master of purity. I mean, because it's not a cliche what she does. It's actually, she hardly does anything to say I'm a pure soul. She doesn't do any of those cliches, and yet you feel it from her. You feel her spirit. And she's not a perfect person, but in a sense she tries to be. But she needs, because she's in so much pain, and she knows she's dying. It's really a fairly remarkable performance and quite subtle, especially because the other actresses who have larger parts in the movie are so demonstrably excellent. Liv Ullmann, and particularly Liv Ullmann and Ingrid Thulin. What Ingrid Thulin accomplishes in the film is absolutely astonishing. There's a scene where she reveals her hatred for her sister, and she's manically crazy about it, saying, do you understand how much I hate you? And she names all the reasons. And in a way, they're all correct, but it's so nasty. It's so felt, this hatred, but it's so real, but it's extremely vicious. And then she'll switch in a moment to talking about something practical, like arrangements for the funeral of the sister and how they need a lawyer and what they have to inventory in the house and this sort of thing. And then she'll go back to talking in this extraordinarily vicious way, even about herself, about wanting to commit suicide. And I mean, it gets very deep. And then she'll switch back again to something practical. Or try to make up to her sister. I didn't really mean it. We're just upset by what's going on. But what's incredible is to switch back and forth almost like a schizophrenic between these things. And yet you see moment to moment to moment the process by which she does it as a human being. I don't mean as an actress. I mean as a human being. That is flawless. I totally believe her. She is in the moment every single second of that. As I said, Bergman makes very big demands on his actors. This is one of the biggest demands on an actor I've ever seen. Is Ingrid Thulin's work in this scene is extraordinary. Liv Ullmann too, who's on the receiving end of this. Her look of shock and outrage and hurt when Ingrid Thulin tells her these things is extraordinarily true. I mean, you feel it in your bones what this woman's feeling in that moment. And it goes on and on. I mean, you really feel it. It's very powerful. And then interestingly, at the end of the scene, they kind of make up. And Karin says, apologizes and says, yes, we should get closer to each other. She's afraid to be touched, her character, but she lets Liv Ullmann touch her, and she even touches her sister. And the end of the scene is them touching each other on the face and whispering things to each other. You don't even hear what they're saying. It's not important. Remember, the film is called Cries and Whispers. There's whispers all through the film. It's mysterious. What are they saying? But you see them touching. Touch is a very important thing in this film, as it is in most Bergman films. We could talk about that for a while. We will. But the end of that scene is these two sisters making up and crying and touching each other's faces and whispering to each other. And yet, what's so interesting is at the very end of the film, after the funeral and when they're going to go their separate ways, and Liv Ullmann as Maria is acting a bit coldly to Karin now. Pleasant, but obviously artificially pleasant, not warm and loving. And Karin, who most of the film we see her as a very vicious character, very kind of nasty and closed, but she did open up in that one scene with her sister and they touched each other. And she says, because touch is important to Karin, and it's very hard for her to do, she says, but we touched each other. We're going to continue this. We're going to be loving sisters. And Liv Ullmann's character says, okay, yeah, fine, right. Well, I'll see you at the next holiday. And very cold, very with a fake smile on her face, and then just leaves. And you see in Ingrid Thulin's face the betrayal, that she was right all along when she said that Maria was superficial and hypocritical, and with her fake smiles and wet kisses and all of this, that it was never real. Well, turns out she was right. And it's two things here that's great acting. Is, I'm always talking about you can do more than one thing at a time. That's why I don't particularly like to work in objectives unless I absolutely have to, which is like television where you get the script the day before. Okay, objective carries you through a scene in a straight line. It can be very useful that way. But for great acting and in a wonderful play or film, it's limiting. Playing objectives can be quite limiting. I know there's ways a master of objectives will say, yeah, but you change objectives every shift of the scene. Yeah, but that's still a bit of an artificial construction if you think about it. It can lead to something decent. I'm not saying no, but it's not exactly organic. What's more organic is to not actually know what the end result is. Because in life you don't. In life you don't know. You may think you know, but you don't. You may actually play an objective in life in a way, but you have to be completely open to it switching at any moment for any reason. Playing objectives is just a way of organizing a work when you're not confident enough. Sometimes that's necessary, like getting the script the day before. Who would be confident enough? But in a great work, you have the time to rehearse, hopefully, it's not the best way to work. It's not bad, but it's not the best way. The best way is more through, again, setting up the color palette, having all those colors to draw on, and then seeing what happens, particularly between you and the other actors and the environment and your senses, moment to moment to moment. So what these actresses are holding more than one thing going on that seem to be contradictory is that in the case of Ingrid Thulin, just two of those things, there's more, but just two, are that she's an angry, hateful person, really rather vicious. And at the same time, she's quite vulnerable and open to feeling, though she finds it extraordinarily painful to express that feeling. And she's actually right. She's correct in a lot of her assessments and reading of other people. Vicious as her judgments are, she turns out to be right. And so we start to see the reason she's vicious and angry is because she's reading people correctly, and those people are not, they're lying to her. They are fake. They are hypocritical. She says at one point in the film to herself, in a kind of agony, all the lies, all the lies, all the lies. And And for her, she puts up a facade of being this extraordinarily competent woman, severe woman, unforgiving of people making mistakes, this sort of thing, in order to shield herself from feeling a sensitivity toward other people, to be loving with other people, because she always gets burned when she does. And we see that. We see her vulnerability that way. So she has these things going on simultaneously. The hate, the anger, and also the vulnerability. With Liv Ullmann, it's also interesting because she is the superficial, vain, luxury-loving person who will stab you in the back if it suits her. And yet, she desperately wants to be loving. She's always talking about it. She's always seeming to want to be warm and loving with everybody, and very, sort of, don't misinterpret this, classically feminine in that way. Everything about her is sort of classically feminine, the way she moves, the way she wears her hair, everything. And her softness and her voice. And yet, there's a huge side of her that's this scheming bitch. That's this very manipulative, hypocritical person. Does that mean she doesn't feel when she's seemingly loving and warm with other people? Actually, she does. She feels it in the moment. She wants to feel it, and then she does often, up to a point. But that's not... It's something she desires. Why? Maybe she thinks it's attractive in a woman of that era to be that way. I don't know. I didn't do her homework. But it is there. And it's absolutely there, and it's absolutely felt in the moment. And that's a very interesting and right on. It's a excellent insight into human nature. It's because we tend to categorize people. If somebody's a scheming manipulator, we don't see them when they're being warm and loving as it being real. But in the moment for them, it can be real. It absolutely can be real. We human beings are complicated. We can have both those things going on at the same time. And maybe we ourselves don't even realize it.